Some people walk into a courtroom to change a verdict. Others walk in and change every life inside it. I did not understand what that meant until the morning Vincent Russo stepped through those doors. The day had begun like any other. Chicago was wrapped in a blanket of gray clouds, and the wind coming off Lake Michigan carried enough chill to make everyone walk a little faster. I arrived at the courthouse just after 7:30 in the morning, balancing a cup of coffee in one hand and a stack of legal files in the other. My name is Emily Carter. I was 28 years old, an assistant attorney trying to prove that hard work mattered more than connections. Every day felt like a test. Every case felt like an opportunity that could either move my career forward or leave me standing exactly where I was. That morning, the courthouse felt unusually tense. People whispered in hallways. Reporters lingered near entrances. Security officers seemed more alert than usual. Nobody explained why. Nobody had to. Rumors traveled quickly in a building filled with lawyers and journalists. A high-profile hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock. Important people were expected to attend. Powerful people. The kind whose names appeared in newspapers more often than they appeared in public. I spent the first 2 hours organizing evidence, reviewing witness statements, and trying to ignore the nervous energy building around me. By 9:45, the courtroom had begun filling with attorneys, observers, and reporters. Every seat seemed occupied. The air carried the scent of polished wood, paper, and anticipation. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting pale rectangles across the floor. I sat at counsel table reviewing notes for the 100th time when I noticed something strange. The conversations around me began to fade. Not all at once. Gradually. Like a wave moving through the room. Heads turned toward the entrance. Pens stopped moving. Even the reporters lowered their voices. I looked up from my files. The courtroom doors had opened. A man stepped inside. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. No flashy jewelry. No dramatic entrance. Yet somehow every person in the room seemed aware of him immediately. Vincent Russo moved with the calm confidence of someone who never needed attention because attention found him anyway. I recognized the name before I fully recognized the face. Everyone in Chicago knew who Vincent Russo was. Businessman. Investor. Philanthropist. And according to countless rumors, one of the most influential men in the city. The stories surrounding him were impossible to separate from reality. Some people admired him. Others feared him. Most simply avoided discussing him altogether. Yet there he was, walking through a crowded courtroom as if he belonged there more than anyone else. The strange part was not his arrival. The strange part was what happened next. As Vincent approached the gallery seating, his eyes swept across the room. Just once. Briefly. Then they stopped. On me. It lasted no more than a second. Maybe less. Yet something about that moment felt oddly deliberate. I immediately looked back down at my notes, annoyed by my own reaction. Why should I care where Vincent Russo was looking? He was a stranger. Powerful stranger perhaps, but still a stranger. When I glanced up again a few moments later, he had already taken his seat near the back of the courtroom. Calm. Unbothered. Watching everything. The hearing had not even begun, yet the atmosphere felt completely different now. The room seemed smaller somehow. More focused. More intense. I told myself it was because of his reputation. Nothing more. But as the judge entered and everyone rose to their feet, I could not shake the feeling that something significant had just shifted. And deep down, although I could not explain why, I knew my life had quietly divided into two parts. Before Vincent Russo walked into that courtroom, and after. The hearing began exactly at 10 o'clock, yet almost nobody seemed focused on the legal arguments being presented. At least I was not. I tried to be. I truly did. I followed the opening statements, highlighted important sections in my notes, and reminded myself that I had spent weeks preparing for this case. But every time the room grew quiet, I became aware of Vincent Russo sitting several rows behind me. He never interrupted, never spoke out of turn, never did anything that should have attracted attention. And somehow he remained the most noticeable person in the entire courtroom. The judge reviewed procedural matters while attorneys presented arguments with carefully controlled confidence. Reporters scribbled notes. Spectators shifted in their seats. The hearing moved forward exactly as expected. Then something unexpected happened. During a brief recess, one of the senior attorneys from the opposing side approached our table. Richard Holloway was known throughout the city for his sharp tongue and even sharper ego. He enjoyed making younger attorneys uncomfortable. Unfortunately, I was one of his favorite targets. He glanced at the files spread across my table and smiled. "Big day for you, Carter." His tone suggested the opposite. "I am prepared. That is what worries me." Several people nearby laughed politely. Richard leaned slightly closer. Courtrooms have a way of exposing who belongs here and who does not. Normally I would have ignored the comment. But after weeks of preparation and months of pressure, my patience was running thin. "Good thing the evidence decides the case," I replied calmly. His smile faded for a fraction of a second before returning. "We will see." He walked away moments later, leaving the familiar taste of frustration behind. I released a slow breath and returned to organizing my documents. "You handled that well." The voice came from behind me. I turned in surprise. Vincent Russo stood several feet away. For a second, I wondered whether he was speaking to someone else. Then I realized he was looking directly at me. "Excuse me?" I asked. Most people react when Holloway starts talking. There was amusement in his eyes. "You did not." I wanted to. A faint smile appeared on his face. "That makes it even more impressive." Before I could think of a response, another attorney approached him, requesting a quick conversation. Vincent nodded politely and stepped away. The entire interaction lasted less than 30 seconds. Yet somehow it stayed with me throughout the remainder of the recess. When court resumed, I found myself paying closer attention than ever. Not to Vincent. To the case. To every detail. To every opportunity. Perhaps because for the first time all morning, I felt strangely confident. As the hearing continued, witnesses were questioned and documents reviewed. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. Then shortly before lunch, the judge requested a specific piece of evidence. A document that should have been included in our primary filing. My stomach dropped. The folder was not where it was supposed to be. I checked once. Twice. 3 times. Nothing. Panic threatened to rise. The entire courtroom suddenly felt too warm. Too bright. Across the room, attorneys waited. Reporters watched. The judge expected an answer. Then a single sheet of paper appeared beside my elbow. I looked up immediately. Vincent Russo was already returning to his seat. Somehow he had noticed the document slide beneath another file during the recess. He had seen what nobody else saw. The evidence was exactly where I needed it. The judge accepted the submission. The hearing continued. Crisis avoided. Relief washed through me, but it was accompanied by something else. Curiosity. Because Vincent Russo could have remained silent. Instead, he had chosen to help. And for reasons I could not yet understand, that simple gesture changed the way I saw him. After the morning session, I walked slowly through the courthouse corridors, feeling the weight of the morning's events settle into my shoulders. Each step echoed faintly against the marble floors, a quiet rhythm to accompany my thoughts. I remembered Vincent Russo's subtle intervention with the documents, and a faint curiosity lingered in my mind about who he was beyond the composed exterior. As I reached the cafeteria area, the chatter of lawyers and clerks filled the space, blending with the scent of brewed coffee and warm pastries. I picked a corner table, opened my notebook, and began reviewing the morning's proceedings, trying to anticipate possible questions for the afternoon session. Midway through my notes, I noticed a familiar presence approaching, the same calm yet confident energy I had felt earlier. Vincent Russo slid into the seat across from me without a word, casually glancing over the papers scattered on the table, and for a moment, I wondered if he intended to speak or simply observe. He finally broke the silence with a comment about the nuances of court protocol, noting how subtle details often determine the outcome of cases, a perspective I had not considered fully in my own preparation. We discussed the strategic points in the documents, his insights sharp yet delivered with a restraint that made them feel collaborative rather than authoritative. While others in the cafeteria were engrossed in their own conversations, we shared a quiet focus on the information before us, a mutual recognition of the stakes involved. When the bell indicated the resumption of the hearing, we stood and walked together, side by side, through the polished hallways. Vincent's presence was steadying, I realized that my nerves felt more under control with his guidance, even though he was not technically a member of my team. In the courtroom, the afternoon session commenced with witness testimonies that revealed unexpected perspectives on the case, requiring quick adaptation in our approach. Vincent remained unobtrusively in his seat, quietly observing, occasionally leaning forward to offer subtle cues or clarifications to my attention without drawing unnecessary notice. The judge's questions were precise and probing, and I responded with confidence, bolstered by the earlier review and the quiet assurance of Vincent's presence nearby. As the day progressed, it became evident that our combined focus, though informal, was shifting the energy in the room. Lawyers on both sides took note of the composed yet assertive performance, and even opposing counsel appeared more measured, perhaps sensing the unexpected synergy in our approach. At the end of the afternoon, the judge allowed a brief recess, and I felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. Walking out, Vincent offered a few words about attention to subtle details and the importance of remaining composed under scrutiny, his advice resonating with a clarity that made sense long after he left. I returned to my notes, a renewed sense of focus settling in, ready to approach the next phase of the hearing with confidence and strategic insight, aware that the presence of someone like Vincent Russo, quietly observant and insightful, had altered my perception of the challenges ahead and how to navigate them. The courtroom settled into a tense quiet as the next session began, the low hum of anticipation hanging in the air, and I could feel every eye shifting subtly toward the entrance as the doors opened once again, revealing Vincent Russo walking in with a calm yet commanding presence that seemed to draw attention without effort. His sharp suit impeccably tailored and his posture perfectly straight, projecting confidence and control. As he moved down the aisle, the murmurs of the crowd quieted, each step echoing softly against the polished floors, and I noticed the way he scanned the room, eyes calculating, measuring, yet there was a subtle warmth in his expression when he glanced briefly at me, a reassuring acknowledgement that we were aligned in focus. I gathered my notes, straightened my blazer, and prepared for the proceedings, feeling a mixture of nervousness and renewed confidence, aware that his presence changed the dynamics of the room entirely. The opposing counsel shifted in their seats, sensing the subtle shift in energy, and even the judge's attention seemed heightened, the session beginning with the reading of procedural matters and the testimonies of witnesses whose statements required careful consideration, parsing each word with precision and noting how these details might impact the broader outcome. Vincent leaned slightly forward in his seat beside me, offering quiet observations in a tone that was unobtrusive yet insightful, pointing out connections I might have overlooked, encouraging a methodical approach without imposing. We exchanged brief nods of understanding, our silent communication reinforcing the strategy we had been crafting since the morning, allowing me to speak with clarity and confidence when addressing questions and presenting evidence. Outside the immediate focus of the case, the atmosphere was thick with expectation, each participant aware of the subtle shifts and unspoken influence Vincent brought, and yet his presence never overshadowed the formalities, maintaining a respectful balance between authority and support. As the session continued, moments of intense focus alternated with brief interludes of quiet observation, each interaction and comment carrying weight, and I found that the clarity of thought he encouraged allowed me to anticipate questions before they were asked, respond more decisively, and maintain composure under the scrutiny of the courtroom. By the time the afternoon progressed toward its midpoint, the collective energy had shifted noticeably, with careful attention paid to every nuance, every gesture, every subtle detail, and I realized how profoundly his calm, deliberate presence had influenced not just my approach but the perception of our preparedness, shaping the environment with a quiet authority that resonated deeply and set the stage for the remaining proceedings, leaving me both inspired and focused, ready to navigate the complexities ahead with a steady hand and a clear mind. As the courtroom proceedings continued, the weight of anticipation seemed to settle even more heavily on my shoulders, but with Vincent Russo beside me, I felt an unexpected steadiness, his gaze unwavering and attentive as the next witness approached the stand, detailing events with careful precision, and I noticed the subtle way he leaned slightly forward, listening intently while noting key points without disrupting the flow of testimony. I mirrored his attentiveness, recording the details meticulously, recognizing the importance of timing and phrasing in our responses, and feeling the rhythm of the session build, each exchange and statement adding layers of complexity that required sharp focus. The opposing counsel attempted subtle maneuvers, interjecting with questions meant to create doubt, yet Vincent's calm presence and his quiet, guiding suggestions provided a framework for my responses, allowing me to remain composed, clear, and precise, addressing each question with confidence and clarity, while maintaining an approachable demeanor. I observed how the dynamics of the room shifted with each turn of dialogue, the jury's attention caught between our presentation and the witness's account, and how the judge's body language subtly acknowledged the effectiveness of our pacing and strategy. Between testimonies, brief moments allowed me to recalibrate my notes, consulting with Vincent in hushed tones, exchanging observations and insights that ensured we remained synchronized, a silent collaboration that strengthened my confidence and effectiveness. Each segment of the session presented new challenges, unexpected turns in the narrative, and opportunities to clarify facts without appearing defensive, and I felt the impact of his mentorship guiding my tone, posture, and timing. Outside the immediate exchanges, the courtroom held an undercurrent of curiosity and expectation, the crowd's subtle murmurs punctuating moments of tension and resolution, and I realized the magnitude of presence and perception in such formal settings, learning to navigate nuances that extended beyond factual presentation. As afternoon progressed, the flow of testimony continued with methodical precision, and I noticed how Vincent's unspoken cues prompted me to emphasize key points, pause for effect, and maintain engagement, balancing authority with subtle empathy in interactions, and how these adjustments influenced the perception of our credibility and preparedness. By the time the proceedings neared a natural pause, I reflected on the effectiveness of strategic observation, note-taking, and collaboration, understanding how each moment, gesture, and word contributed to a larger narrative, and appreciating the quiet, steady guidance that had enhanced my awareness and capacity to communicate with clarity and authority, readying me for the complex discussions and interactions that would follow in the subsequent segments of the day. The late afternoon sun filtered through the tall courtroom windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden benches, and I felt a heightened sense of anticipation as Vincent Russo and I prepared for the next segment of the proceedings, our focus sharpened by the rhythm of dialogue and the flow of testimony, each detail meticulously noted and assessed for relevance, with Vincent quietly observing the reactions of the judge and jury to our presentation, his subtle nods guiding my tone and cadence as I spoke with clarity and confidence, emphasizing critical points while maintaining a professional, composed demeanor. I noticed the way the opposing counsel attempted to introduce doubt through carefully worded questions, but Vincent's quiet interventions and the subtle cues we had established allowed me to respond strategically, remaining calm and precise, reinforcing our credibility and control of the narrative, while the audience's eyes subtly followed each exchange, their expressions a mix of curiosity and engagement. Between testimonies, brief exchanges with Vincent allowed us to adjust our approach, discussing nuances and reinforcing key arguments without disrupting the flow, and I became increasingly aware of how body language, timing, and pacing influence perception, learning to synchronize my movements and gestures with his subtle guidance. As the proceedings continued, the room seemed to pulse with quiet intensity, each question and response layering additional complexity into the narrative, requiring sustained concentration and adaptability, and I recognized the importance of attentiveness to the reactions of the jury and the judge, adapting phrasing and emphasis to maintain engagement and clarity, all while projecting calm authority. The interplay of dialogue, observation, and strategic response created a dynamic that demanded continuous mental agility, and I noticed how Vincent's presence provided a grounding influence, helping me maintain focus while navigating unexpected developments and subtle shifts in tone or emphasis. Every detail, from the angle of a glance to the subtle pause before an answer, contributed to the impression of careful deliberation and professionalism, and I felt the cumulative effect of preparation, observation, and real-time adaptation building momentum, reinforcing the impact of our arguments and the strength of our collaborative approach. As the segment drew toward a natural pause, I reflected on how our strategic coordination and mutual awareness had allowed us to manage the complexities of the courtroom environment effectively, ensuring that each interaction conveyed confidence, credibility, and a nuanced understanding of the unfolding narrative, preparing us for the next phase of proceedings with a sense of measured readiness and heightened awareness of the subtle dynamics at play. When the judge announced an adjournment until the following morning, a collective breath seemed to leave the courtroom all at once. Papers were gathered, chairs shifted, conversations resumed in low voices, Yet despite the movement around me, I remained seated for a moment, staring at the notes spread across the table. The day had been exhausting. More importantly, it had been revealing. I had entered the courthouse that morning focused entirely on the case. Somewhere along the way, my attention had expanded to include something else. Someone else. Vincent Russo remained near the gallery as people slowly filed toward the exits. Unlike everyone else, he appeared completely unaffected by the long hours and constant pressure. His composure never seemed to crack. It was one of the first things I had noticed about him, and perhaps one of the reasons I found myself watching him more often than I intended. "You did well today." His voice interrupted my thoughts. I looked up. He stood beside the table, one hand resting lightly against the back of a chair. "I survived today," I corrected. A faint smile appeared on his face. "There is a difference. A very important difference." He nodded toward the stack of files. "Most people would have folded under that amount of pressure. You keep saying things like that. Because they are true." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The courtroom had nearly emptied now. Late afternoon sunlight poured through the tall windows, painting long golden lines across the polished floor. Everything felt quieter than before. More personal. Less like a courtroom and more like a place suspended between one chapter and the next. Vincent glanced toward the windows. "Have you always wanted to practice law?" The question caught me off guard. Most people asked about cases. Or career ambitions. Not the reason behind them. "Since I was 16, I answered. "That is unusually specific. A teacher told me I talked too much." His laugh surprised me. "Warm. Genuine. And you decided to turn that into a profession?" "Exactly. That may be the most practical career decision I have ever heard." I laughed too. The sound echoed softly through the nearly empty room. Strange how natural the conversation felt. We came from completely different worlds. Yet speaking with him never felt difficult. If anything, it felt easier than most conversations I had every day. Eventually we began walking toward the courthouse exit together. The marble hallways were quieter now. Most of the reporters had already left. The evening sun illuminated the entrance through massive glass doors. As we walked, I became increasingly aware of the subtle reactions people had whenever Vincent passed. Security officers nodded respectfully. Attorneys stepped aside. Staff members greeted him by name. Nobody seemed intimidated exactly, but everyone noticed him. Influence surrounded him as naturally as air. Outside, the city glowed beneath the fading sunlight. Traffic moved steadily through downtown Chicago. The courthouse steps overlooked streets filled with people rushing toward trains, restaurants, and evening plans. Vincent paused near the bottom of the staircase. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Of course. Why were you really there today?" For the first time since meeting him, he hesitated. Not long. Just enough for me to notice. His eyes moved briefly toward the skyline before returning to mine. "At first," he asked, "curiosity. And now?" The question lingered between us. The sounds of the city seemed to fade into the background. Vincent studied me for several seconds before answering. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before. More honest. "Now I am not entirely sure." Something shifted inside me at that moment. Not because of what he said. Because of how he said it. There was no performance. No carefully constructed image. Only sincerity. And standing there beneath the golden light of a Chicago evening, I realized the courtroom case was no longer the only story unfolding. Something else had begun. Something neither of us fully understood yet. And, for the first time, I was no longer certain I wanted to understand it before seeing where it led. The next morning arrived wrapped in silver clouds and the kind of quiet that always seemed to appear before an important decision. I arrived at the courthouse earlier than usual, carrying a fresh cup of coffee and more determination than sleep. The city outside was just beginning to wake up. Streetlights still glowed faintly against the morning sky. Inside the courthouse, however, everything was already moving. Attorneys reviewed files. Reporters prepared their notes. Court staff crossed hallways with practiced urgency. Yet despite the activity around me, my thoughts kept returning to the conversation Vincent and I had shared the evening before. His words had followed me home. Not because they were dramatic, Because they were honest. In a city filled with carefully managed appearances, honesty felt unexpectedly rare. When I entered the courtroom, I noticed him immediately. Vincent sat in the same place he had occupied the previous day. Calm, focused, watching. For a brief moment our eyes met. He offered a small nod. Nothing more. Yet somehow it settled my nerves. The hearing resumed shortly after 10 o'clock. Witnesses returned. Documents were reviewed. Arguments continued. Hours passed beneath the steady rhythm of legal procedure. Then everything changed. Not through a shocking interruption or dramatic announcement. Through a single piece of testimony. A longtime financial consultant took the stand and provided information that connected several facts nobody had previously viewed together. Suddenly details that had seemed unrelated formed a clear pattern. The courtroom became noticeably quieter as the significance settled over everyone present. Even the judge appeared surprised by the implications. I listened carefully, making notes as quickly as possible. Across the room, reporters filled pages with observations. The atmosphere had shifted once again. This time because the truth was beginning to reveal itself. During a brief recess, I stepped into the hallway to organize my thoughts. Large windows overlooked downtown Chicago. Traffic moved below like streams of light in motion. I barely noticed any of it. You saw it too. Vincent's voice came from beside me. I turned toward him. The testimony. He nodded. Everything changed the moment that witness started speaking. You knew. Not the details. His expression remained thoughtful. But I suspected there was more beneath the surface. I looked through the glass toward the skyline. I spent weeks focusing on individual facts. Most people do. And you. A faint smile appeared. I learned a long time ago that people rarely hide information. They hide connections. I considered that for several seconds. Sounded simple. Yet it explained more than I wanted to admit. Not only about the case. About life. About people. About the strange path that had brought us here. When court resumed for the final session of the day, the momentum continued building. Questions that had seemed impossible to answer yesterday now had direction. Uncertainty slowly transformed into clarity. By late afternoon, it was obvious that the case was approaching a conclusion. The judge announced that final arguments would take place the following morning before a decision was reached. A quiet murmur spread through the room. Everyone understood what that meant. We were close to the end. As people began leaving their seats, Vincent remained standing beside the gallery entrance, waiting. When I approached, he glanced toward the courtroom one final time. Tomorrow changes everything, he said. I should have disagreed. I should have told him the outcome was still uncertain. Instead, I found myself looking at him and realizing he was talking about more than the case. Tomorrow would bring answers. But it would also force choices. And as we walked together toward the courthouse doors beneath the fading afternoon light, I could not escape the feeling that the most important decision waiting ahead had nothing to do with the courtroom at all. The morning light filtered through the tall courthouse windows, casting a warm glow across polished wood and rows of empty seats as anticipation hung thick in the air. I arrived early, clutching a folder of documents that had been meticulously organized the night before, knowing that today would finally reveal truths that had lingered unspoken for so long. Vincent was already there, standing near the entrance with a composed demeanor that contrasted sharply with the anxious energy of everyone else around us. His eyes met mine briefly, conveying both reassurance and the unspoken understanding that the path ahead would test more than our patience. As the courtroom slowly filled with people, the hum of whispered conversations and shuffling papers created a background rhythm, almost like a heartbeat of tension waiting to erupt. The judge entered promptly, and proceedings began with the clarity and precision that only years of practice could command, each word measured, each gesture purposeful. Witnesses approached the stand, and their testimonies, though seemingly ordinary, carried the weight of accumulated secrets and delicate insights, each detail slowly weaving together a tapestry of revelations that shifted the narrative in ways nobody had anticipated. I felt Vincent's presence beside me, quiet but attentive, a reminder that we were navigating this together. Two forces observing the subtle currents of truth that moved through the room. Hours passed as evidence was presented, cross-examinations carefully conducted, and arguments articulated with skill and restraint. every moment building toward a culmination that promised resolution and consequence. Outside, the city carried on unaware, cars streaming along streets and pedestrians moving with the rhythm of daily life. A stark contrast to the intensity inside these walls where lives and decisions balanced on fragile truths. Then, in a quiet turn, a single piece of evidence was introduced that tied together threads previously overlooked, illuminating connections that had seemed invisible, and igniting a ripple of realization among those present. The judge paused, eyebrows raised, the weight of the discovery evident, and the room seemed to collectively inhale, understanding that nothing would remain the same once the implications settled fully. Vincent shifted slightly, his expression thoughtful but unreadable, a calm anchor amid the storm of revelation. The final arguments were presented with deliberate clarity, voices steady, convictions clear, and when the judge finally adjourned the session for deliberation, a sense of quiet anticipation lingered. As the courtroom emptied, we remained, absorbing the gravity of the moments that had unfolded, the unspoken bond between us strengthened by shared observation and silent acknowledgement of the challenges and choices ahead. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that stretched across the floor, and I realized that the conclusion we had sought was within reach. Yet it was the personal journey, the quiet understanding between two people navigating a complex world, that would define the meaning of the outcome more than any verdict or document could. Walking together toward the exit, the weight of the day settled into a reflective calm, a recognition that what had begun as a series of observations and cautious interactions had evolved into a moment of clarity, the end of one chapter and the subtle promise of new beginnings, the courthouse doors closing behind us with a resonance that felt final yet inviting, signaling that decisions had been made, truths unveiled, and the future stretched ahead with both certainty and possibility.